telling this exactly as it happened. No embellishment. No campfire fiction. It was late August when my friend Jenna and I decided to backpack a quiet stretch of trail in southeastern Ohio, part of the Appalachian foothills. We'd picked a section that locals said was peaceful. Dense hardwood forest, mossy ridges, barely any hikers after dark. Perfect for an overnight escape. The day was warm and dry, the trail soft beneath our boots. By dusk we'd found a small clearing ringed with old sycamores. We set up our tiny two-person tent, ate trail mix, and watched the stars pierce through gaps in the canopy. A barred owl called in the distance. Everything felt normal. Around midnight the temperature dropped and a hush settled over the woods, so quiet that even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. I woke first. At first I thought it was the dream that had startled me, but then I heard it. A long, low inhale. Not wind. Not an animal sniffing the air. This was the unmistakable sound of someone drawing breath. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I froze, listening. Another inhale, louder this time. The sound was coming from the trees just beyond our campfire's ash circle. 10 feet away. Maybe less. I reached for my headlamp but stopped when I heard footsteps. Soft, deliberate, crunching on dry leaves. One step. Pause. Another step. Whoever, or whatever, it was, moved with an eerie patience, as if it knew exactly where we were and didn't care if we heard. "Jenna?" I whispered, barely moving my lips. She stirred and I felt her tense beside me. She'd heard it too. The breathing grew louder, raspy and wet, like air forced through a massive chest. Then silence. We waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The forest held its breath with us. Suddenly the footsteps resumed, circling our tent. Crunch. Crunch. I could picture someone, something, pacing a slow ring around us. Jenna gripped my wrist. I could feel her pulse hammering as hard as mine. I wanted to shout, to warn whoever it was that we were armed, even though we weren't, but fear locked my throat. We sat there, barely breathing, while the unseen visitor continued its slow orbit. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. No retreating steps. No brush of leaves. Just gone. We stayed awake until dawn, every nerve on edge. When the gray morning light finally filtered through the sycamores, we unzipped the tent and scanned the clearing. The ground was damp with dew and littered with last night's leaves, but no footprints. No broken branches. Nothing. And yet the smell lingered. A faint, musky odor like wet fur and earth. Jenna noticed it too. We packed in silence, glancing over our shoulders all the way back to the trailhead. Neither of us spoke until we were in the car with the doors locked. Only then did we admit it. The sound we'd heard wasn't human. It breathed too deep, too heavy, too slow. I've hiked hundreds of miles on the Appalachian Trail, but nothing prepared me for what happened on a cool October night in North Carolina. I was solo through hiking that week, enjoying the solitude and the sharp scent of fallen leaves. By late afternoon I'd climbed a rocky ridge that overlooked a valley washed in amber light. The trail was empty. I hadn't seen another person since lunch. I chose a narrow shelf of level ground just below the ridgeline to pitch my small tent. From there I could hear the wind moving through the trees and the distant rush of a creek. Perfectly peaceful. I boiled water, ate a quick meal, and crawled into my sleeping bag as dusk thickened into night. Sometime after midnight, a sound pulled me from a dead sleep. Footsteps. Not the quick rustle of a deer or the scurry of a raccoon. These were deliberate, heavy, boot-like steps on dry leaves, measured and slow. I held my breath and listened. The steps came again, pacing the ridge above my campsite. 1, 2, 3, each separated by a pause, as if someone were trying not to be heard but couldn't quite mask their weight. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and peered out. The moon was bright enough to silver the treetops, but the ridge itself lay in shadow. I saw nothing. Then the steps stopped. The silence was so complete that the blood pounding in my ears felt deafening. I flicked off my headlamp and strained to listen. A minute passed. Nothing. I'd almost convinced myself it was an animal when the footsteps started again. This time circling, as if whoever it was had changed direction. Crunch, crunch, each step echoed off the ridge, perfectly spaced. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice cracked the night like a gunshot. No answer. I grabbed the small knife I carry more for peace of mind than defense and crouched just outside the tent. The sound of my own breathing felt too loud. The footsteps stopped once more. A branch snapped, sharp and close, maybe 20 feet upslope. My first thought was a fellow hiker playing a prank, but the trail register at the last shelter showed no one else within 5 miles. I hadn't passed a single tent site all day. The air turned suddenly colder, as if a cloud had passed over the moon, though the sky remained clear. I could see my breath curling in the faint light. Then came a low scraping sound like something dragging across rock. That was enough. I yanked my pack inside, zipped the tent, and sat with my back to the door, knife in hand. For the next hour I heard intermittent noises, 2 steps here, a faint crunch there, never closer, never farther, just circling. At one point a gust of wind carried a smell down the slope. Damp earth mixed with something metallic, almost like blood. My stomach tightened. I must have dozed in sheer exhaustion because the next thing I knew pale light was seeping through the nylon walls. Birds were already chattering as if nothing had happened. I climbed the ridge to look for prints. The leaf litter was thick, but I found 2 distinct impressions. Deep ovals the size of large boots, side by side, pointing directly toward my campsite. No trail leading in. No trail leading out. I followed the ridge in both directions for half a mile. No more prints. No broken branches. Nothing. When I finally shouldered my pack to leave, I felt eyes on me, an unmistakable prickle at the back of my neck. I turned in a slow circle. The woods stood silent, sun streaming through the oaks. But the feeling stayed with me for miles, all the way to the next shelter where other hikers listened wide-eyed as I told the story. Some said it had to be a black bear, though none of them could explain the perfectly timed 2-legged stride or the absence of any retreating tracks. One older hiker just shook his head and muttered, "There are things in these mountains that don't leave footprints when they don't want to." I don't know what I heard that night. I only know the sound of those measured steps, slow, deliberate, circling, still echoes in my memory whenever the trail grows quiet and the moonlight pools across a lonely ridge. I've always considered myself a practical outdoorsman. I grew up in rural Tennessee, the kind of kid who camped out under the stars before I could drive. I've seen black bears up close, heard coyotes scream at midnight, and never once felt uneasy. That changed last spring on a solo hike in the high ridges of the Appalachian Range. It was early May, dogwoods blooming white against the dark green hills, when I decided to spend 3 nights exploring an old logging trail that few people still use. The path climbs steeply before spilling onto a series of narrow ridges where the pines grow thick and the moss muffles every sound. I'd done it once years ago with friends, but this time I wanted solitude. Day 1 was perfect. Cool air, birdsong, a gentle breeze that carried the smell of pine resin. By late afternoon I reached a flat spot just below the summit and set up camp. The view stretched for miles, rolling blue ridges fading into mist. I cooked a simple dinner, watched the sun dip behind the western peaks, and settled in as darkness spread through the valley. Sometime after midnight, a sound pulled me out of a dream. It wasn't the usual forest chatter. No owl, no raccoon rummaging through leaves. This was a rhythm, thud, 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 like something enormous walking deliberately through the trees. I froze, ears straining. The steps were slow but impossibly heavy, each one sending a faint vibration through the ground. I could feel them in my chest. My first thought was a black bear. I reached for the flashlight, but a strange instinct made me stop. The footfalls weren't the quick shuffle of a bear. They were spaced like a man's stride, only deeper, heavier. The steps paused. Then came a long, wet inhale. It sounded as if an entire tree trunk had drawn breath. Every hair on my body rose. Another inhale, closer this time. I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and slid out, crouching low. The moonlight was bright enough to silver the ridge, but the forest beyond was a tangle of black. "Who's there?" I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. Silence. Then from somewhere to my left, a branch snapped, loud, deliberate. Whatever it was had moved while I spoke. I swung the flashlight in that direction. The beam caught nothing but trunks and shadows. Yet the sense of being watched was overwhelming, almost physical. The breathing resumed, slow, cavernous, like bellows feeding a forge. And then came the smell, a thick, musky odor of wet fur and earth, tinged with something metallic. My stomach turned. I backed toward the tent, light sweeping in frantic arcs. My mind raced through possibilities. Bear? Okay. A trespasser trying to scare me? But who would hike miles of abandoned trail in the middle of the night without a light of their own? The footsteps began again, circling just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Each impact was heavy enough that I could feel the faint tremor in the soil beneath my boots. I shouted louder now, "I'm armed." A lie, though I held only a small folding knife. The steps stopped instantly, as if the forest itself had frozen. For a full minute there was nothing. No crickets, no wind, only the thunder of my own heartbeat. Then from the opposite side of the clearing, a deep growl rolled through the trees. Low, resonant, not quite animal, not quite human. It lasted several seconds, rising at the end like a challenge. I stumbled back into the tent and zipped it closed with shaking hands. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the thought of turning my back was worse. I sat with my knife across my lap, listening. The creature, or whatever it was, circled for what felt like hours. Sometimes I heard 2 or 3 steps, then silence. Sometimes only the breathing, drawn out and patient, as if it were studying me. At one point the tent fabric bulged inward as though a massive hand, or paw, had brushed it. I stifled a shout, heart hammering so hard it hurt. And then, nothing. I don't remember falling asleep, only jerking awake to a pale dawn. The woods were alive with bird calls, the night's terror almost unbelievable in daylight. I stepped outside, half expecting to find tracks. At first the ground looked undisturbed, the thick mat of pine needles giving away no secrets. Then I saw them. 2 impressions in the moss, side by side, each at least 16 inches long. Not quite human, not quite animal, an elongated shape with a faint curve where toes might be. They pointed directly toward my tent. I tried to photograph them, but the early light and the dark needles made the outlines faint. Within minutes the morning sun began to dry the ground, softening the prints until they vanished. I broke camp in silence and hiked out faster than I thought possible, every rustle behind me raising the hairs on my neck. When I reached cell service I called a friend who knows these mountains well. Before I could finish he said quietly, "You heard the ridge walker." I'd heard that term before, local talk for something large and ancient that moves through these hills. Most people treat it as folklore, a way to scare newcomers. I used to laugh at it myself. Not anymore. Even now, weeks later, the memory of that breathing haunts me. I hear it in the back of my mind when the house is quiet, a slow, wet inhale that doesn't belong to any animal I know. I've camped many times since, but I've never returned to that ridge. Some nights I wake suddenly, heart pounding, sure I've heard that same heavy footstep outside my window. And in those moments I know the truth I can't explain. Something immense and intelligent walks those Appalachian ridges. I've always felt safer in the woods than in cities, the quiet, the stars, the smell of pine. But what happened last summer changed how I view that safety. Me and my friend Olivia set up camp in a remote clearing in the Appalachians, somewhere in Virginia. We hiked in late afternoon, carrying all our gear, water, food, expecting a clear night. The view looked breathtaking, ridges rolling into blue haze, a river glinting somewhere off to our left. We made camp near a stand of hemlocks. Olivia gathered wood. I filled water. As dusk fell, the forest went from gold to purple, then deep indigo. We ate dinner, chatted about stars, about bear stories, about what the night might hold. Tent zipped, gear put away. The fire cracked and popped. Eventually we drifted off, Olivia first. I lay awake a while, watching the embers dim, listening to crickets. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a faint sound. At first I thought it was wind in the trees, a branch tapping against the tent pole. But then, the faintest whisper. I froze. Olivia, it sounded like someone calling her name. Soft, almost regretful. Not quite a voice I recognized. I shifted in the sleeping bag. The whisper came again, Olivia, closer this time, beyond the edge of the hemlock stand where the forest darkened to shadow. Heart pounding, I whispered, Olivia? Out loud. No reply. Silence. Then footsteps. Slow, uncertain, crunching leaves just behind our tent. I held perfectly still. Firelight flickered. Shadowy shapes among the trees lay dormant, but I saw movement, dim silhouettes stepping between trunks. A human shape, tall, but the limbs looked wrong, elongated, the gait limp or maybe cautious. Another whisper, Olivia. The voice was sorrowful, almost pleading. I tried to zip open the tent to shine the flashlight, but terror gripped me. What if I saw something I couldn't unsee? What if shining a light made it angry? The footsteps drew closer. 1, 2, 3 steps. Then paused. Right outside the tent flap. I could hear breath. Not heavy. Soft, ragged. And out. I felt a faint breeze over my cheek, like someone had exhaled. The smell of wet earth and moss, something musty like damp wool. I squeezed Olivia's arm. She murmured in sleep but didn't wake. The figure moved on, steps retraced, crunching back through fallen leaves, retreating toward the hemlocks. The whisper echoed faintly, "Olivia? Olivia?" until it tapered into silence. No snap, no crack, just the forest breathing. I stayed awake until first light, senses on edge, the whisper haunted in my ears. When dawn came and I unzipped the flap, nothing. No broken branches. No prints. The ground looked undisturbed except for our gear, our footprints. But I found one thing, Olivia's shoe off just outside the tent. I have no idea how it got there. I packed it quietly into her bag, too shaken to speak. We hiked out quickly. I asked her in daylight, "Did you dream your name called?" She shook her head. She slept through it. She had no idea anything had happened. I've spent nights out before but never felt anything like that. Someone reaching across the darkness, calling out, waiting. I don't know what called us, why it whispered Olivia's name. But I know I heard it. I've been hiking with friends for years, camping under stars, following ridgelines, loving the way the forest feels alive at night. But there's one night I remember so clearly, I can still taste the cold air and feel the crunch of frost underfoot. That night changed how I think about the woods after dark. It was early November, just after sunset, in remote Pennsylvania, deep in the ridges of the Appalachians. My two friends, Sarah and Diego, and I had planned a short overnight backpack to test our gear. The forecast called for cold but clear skies. Golden twilight faded into purple dusk as we ascended a wooded slope, stepping through oak and chestnut, until we reached a gently sloping plateau. We unloaded our packs, set up tents, and ate dinner beside a crackling fire. By the time we turned in, the sky was full of stars and the moon was a slim crescent. The fire died to embers. Sarah and Diego drifted to sleep quickly. I lingered a while, staring through the trees at the dark ridge above, listening to the woods settle. Around 2:15 a.m. I was awakened by noise. A low guttural sigh, not wind, not animal, something else. I snapped awake and gripped my flashlight, shining its beam out through the tent flap. The forest was still but for the distant whisper of leaves. Then came something walking. Heavy steps. A slow shuffle across leaf litter. Not running, but each step deliberate, almost human. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribcage, but I couldn't make a sound. It came again. Footstep. Pause. Footstep. Pause. I unzipped the tent a crack, peering through only a sliver. The light from the moon wasn't enough, but I saw it. A figure, tall, upright, just on the edge of the ridge. Brown fur? Maybe. Dark shadow? Definitely. It held itself like a man walking on two legs. Not crouched, not hunkered. Standing straight. My mouth went dry. It stopped at a tree line, glanced our direction, or I could swear it did, and then turned, taking a slow step away. I think I gasped, or my breath caught in my throat. Either way, I zipped the tent fast and shook Sarah and Diego awake. "Something's out there," I whispered. Sarah blinked, groggy. Diego shone his headlamp out into the darkness. There. Nothing visible. Just trees dancing in moonlight. Leaves whispering in a breeze so faint you'd think the forest was breathing. I wanted to say it was a bear or someone messing around at camp, but that didn't feel right. The animal confusion didn't fit. Silhouette upright. Too tall to be a bear on all fours, too deliberate in gait. And the shape, thick legs, broad shoulders, long arms, it stood too human, too erect. We sat in silence, hearts pounding. The wind died. The forest paused. Seconds passed like minutes. Then a single thumping sound came, heavy and slow. Like someone was stomping on an old wooden step. It echoed weirdly through the trees, once, twice, and then, nothing. The forest exhaled. Distance swallowed the echo. I crawled out of the tent, flashlight trembling in my hand. The ground was cold, dew frozen in pockets. I scanned the ridge above with the beam, waiting. Nothing. I stayed out maybe 5 minutes, circling the firelight, looking up, listening. Leaf litter underfoot. Tree bark and shadows. No prints up the slope. No droppings. No broken branches. Whatever it was, it left no trace of approach or retreat. Morning came in pale blue light. I glanced around. My tent flap was zipped shut. Gear undisturbed. Fire pit cold. But at the edge of the clearing I noticed just one impression, a deep depression in soft soil. It looked like a big boot print, maybe 14 to 16 inches, very wide. No tread, no sole design. Just the outline pressed into earth. Diego measured it with his hand. We photographed it, but by the time sun warmed the soil, the print had softened. Edges crumbling. By midday barely visible. We packed and left without speaking much. I haven't been back to that ridge since. That's what I experienced. I'm not sure if it was a cryptid, someone's prank, or something else I can't name. All I know, the forest felt alive that night in a way I've never felt before. If you enjoy stories like this, and want more real encounters from Appalachian ridges, leave a comment below with places you've hiked or things you've experienced. Subscribe so you're there when the next story drops. Because out here in the dark you never know who or what is watching.